Today we will look into the book of Judges. Just as an introduction, we will see how the transition happened from Joshua to Judges and why it had to happen and things of that sort. So have your Bible open and ready to look at maybe the first 3 chapters. We'll not look at every verse, but we'll flip between Joshua, Judges, and so on and so forth. So when you look at the book of Judges, it's not the contemporary judge that you think about, like these days you have the guy sitting on the top in the court and he listens to the plaintiff and the defendant and rules the judgment, right? This is not that kind of a judge. This is more like a deliverer, is another word that has been used. And God has used this judge, a miraculous, a warrior kind of a person, right? And then, there's also Deborah in between. So, how was she a warrior? How did she deliver? We'll get to that when we get to Deborah. But overall, God chose, I think, the most valiant person existing at that point among the 12 tribes, with one exception of where God chooses one judge outside the 12 tribes of Israel. We'll look into that also late in the coming weeks. But this will be like a foundation for the study to that book. So there were 12 men and women. As far as I've been reading it, I found only Deborah was the only woman, but the other were men. And if you dig deep, you can find a few others, like Shamgar, who has just a few verses dedicated to him. But he's also, some people consider him as a judge also, because he killed more than about 600 Philistines. So, and when this happened 300 years space between 1375 and 1035 BC. And you can summarize the book of Judges as a vicious cycle, right? A vicious cycle where, people fall into sin, they confess, they are forgiven, God gives them, delivers them, God chooses a person, uses that person to deliver them, and then everybody's happy, life goes on, there is peace and worship. True worship is going on, and then again, they fall. And they say the same thing. You read, from Othniel all the way to Samson. All these judges have been introduced just because Israel played the harlot, right? It did not have one God to worship, right? It did not have one husband. It just was wavering all the time. And when you look at that, the primary, the one word that can summarize the whole book is failure because of compromise. You compromise and then there's the failure, right? The consequence of compromise is always failure, all the time, right? And there are some places where, compromising is good, but in this case, it's all the bad things have happened just because they have compromised on what God was asking them to do, right? So that's like a 10,000 foot view of the book of Judges, but we will just scratch the surface today and go on to Exodus chapter 34, where here is the context is God gave Israel the 10 commandments, and Moses was coming down and he saw them idol worshipping. Then he was so angry that he threw the tablets and the tablets broke. And then, the whole thing, then God writes another set of tablets, right? Like a new iPad for Moses, coming in. And then Moses is back on the mountain to gather that new tablet that is given to him. And God is saying to Moses, right, in verse 12, this is the second set of tablets that God is giving. And God says, take heed to yourself, lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land where you're going, lest it be a snare in your midst. Right? Verse 13 says, but you shall destroy their altars, break their sacred pillars, and cut down their wooden images, for you shall worship no other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. You know, God is not just a jealous God, His name itself is jealous. He cannot withstand any sort of division, of love. You know, any bit of you being distracted and trying to look at other gods. He wouldn't. He is that kind of a God, and has he changed because it's New Testament period? I don't think so. I don't think the God has changed. He's still the same. He's got the same kind of jealousy, right? And then verse 15 says, lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and then play the harlot with their gods and make sacrifice to their gods. And one of them invites you, and you eat of his sacrifice. It's like God saying, you go to somebody's house and they're saying, you know what, this is okay, man. I know you're a Christian, but this is fine. What's wrong with the mug of beer, or what's wrong with this? What's wrong with that? And as a Christian, if you are invited by somebody and you are picking that mug of beer or a bottle of wine or whatever that is, just because you've been invited and you don't want to hurt their feelings. So what's happening here? What happened here is that you already have forgotten what your Lord has said to you. That's all. You have crossed that line that God said, no, you ought not to cross it. You cannot touch that thing. You cannot bow your head to that idol, that wooden image. You cannot do that. And then verse 16 says, and you take of his daughters for your sons, and his daughters play the harlot with their gods, and make your sons play the harlot with their gods. I mean, it's like, even with marriage. God is saying that you just cannot marry somebody outside the will of God. You just cannot marry an unbeliever. Just because, why? Because she's going to come, and because you want to have a peaceful marriage, you will do what she wants in that house. That's it. As simple as that. And his daughter plays the harlot with their gods. His daughter will say, you know what, this is the God that I've been serving. I'm not going to leave that God, so I'm going to bring my idol. And you're like, okay, you got your own bedroom, so you can put your wooden image in that bedroom, that's fine. Or you have a room specific for that where I will not be entering. But you know what? You forget the fact that it is in your house. You see how things creep in? And God knows about it. Because He has made you and me. He knows exactly what is going to happen. And you are sometimes, we are like, one of my friends, one of my best friends, he actually is an elder, son of an elder in my church. And this guy fell in love with a girl, that's not a Christian. And then he had the boldness, I would never have the boldness, he had the boldness to actually tell his dad about the girl. Can you imagine that? He was having a man-to-man conversation. And by the end of the man was such a wise elder that by the end of the conversation, by God's grace, he was able to convince his son, telling him all these things. What's going to happen? You're not looking at what's going to happen after marriage. You're not looking at the possibility that you can actually become an idol worshipper. You're not looking at that. Have you ever sat down and thought that after marriage, she may bring her idols into your house? How are you going to respond to that? Do you have an answer for that? Are you prepared for that? And so on it went, and almost after 3 hours, this guy came out of the room convinced that, this is not the right thing for me. That doesn't happen normally. Right? And he comes to me and we are like, Swaroop, what happened? And I was like, wow, your dad did that to you, man? I couldn't believe it. Because forget about me talking to my dad like that, but I was really, floored by the way the man handled the situation. He told exactly what was going to happen. He said, you know what, me and your mom, we go to your house, and her parents are going to come. They don't know our language. We don't know their language, and the common language may be English, and the girl's mother doesn't know English either. And then we are stuck here trying to make like the problem that we're facing in the church sometimes, right? So all these problems are inherent. You're actually bagging them up and trying to bring it into your marriage. These are little things, little irritations that are going to cause and crumple your marriage. And you don't think about that. And this guy's like, and he actually was like, he was actually giving me a lecture over there. I never thought about this, but we have to be really careful about it. And he was like, I said, okay, now you got the lesson. That's fine. I'm happy that you got it. And that's exactly what God is telling us. Since the world began, He's been telling us. He's been giving us the cues, and we don't get it. Do we? I don't think we get it. We don't, right? No matter what my dad and mom prayed for me, I've done all the bad things that Jonathan, you're not listening, right? Okay. Anyway, we'll take it on a different day when we have the just the men's meeting. So what I'm saying is the cycle that we see in this book is. It's somebody said that the world, right? The civilizations of the world have a time period, or on an average, they last for 200 years, right? I don't know how true that is. Or a culture, right? You get on now Facebook, right? Is a 2000 culture, right? By 2200, year 2200 AD, there won't be Facebook. There'll be something else. Facebook will be the thing of the past, right? So, similarly, during this civilization that's progressing, right? What happens is there is a circle that happens, right? Man, who's in bondage realizes his condition, and then he goes on to have spiritual faith. He has faith in God. Once he has faith in God, he keeps on having faith, and that faith turns into courage for him. He starts with little faith. Now he's a man of great faith. He is so courageous then, and then with that comes liberty. Now there's so much, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom, right? You are totally, you don't know what bondage is all about anymore. You really don't know, right? After maybe, because I was in India, right, independence came to our country not too long from where I was born, because my dad might have been born just after the freedom, right? And then I was able to still hear the stories of Jallianwala Bagh or the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. All these things are fresh in my mind. But now that I've come into the United States, right, I even try to show my kids the Gandhi movie, right, so that they can get a sense of what struggles our grandfathers have gone through, so that they could liberate India, right? And these guys do not have any clue of bondage, of step one. They are totally enjoying liberty. Totally enjoying. They don't even know how the United States got its own freedom. They don't have a clue. They don't feel it. They are totally liberated from that fact that something like bondage could happen to one country because of another country. They don't have a clue. They don't know how it feels, right? We used to feel that, but slowly, when we go on to generations, now we are living in a time of abundance. And then, when you are in that phase of abundance, then you'll go back to bondage. And this going back to bondage, that cycle happens again in 5 different steps. This is not my words. That comes from a theologian. This step, it has 5 different phases. And those phases are, from abundance, you grow selfishness. From selfishness, you become complacent. When complacent, you become weak. When you become complacent, you become weak. And when you are weak, then again you go back to bondage. You see that? And every civilization, every 200 years, this cycle is going to follow. And this is exactly the story of the book of Judges. Israel, goes into bondage. They confess to God. God gives them a deliverer, and that deliverer, fights for them, gets them freedom. There's peace in the nation. They're worshiping the right God. And again, there's abundance. Then with abundance comes selfishness, complacency, weakness, and then bondage again. Right? So, again, the same vicious cycle. That's why this book is a vicious cycle. But again, this book is as bad as it is for history purposes. It is amazing for us because it is so relevant even in that 21st century. So relevant. Right? And we'll see why. In Joshua chapter 1, verse 1, it says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant. Right? So in Joshua chapter 1, verse 1, who died? Moses died. Judges chapter 1, verse 1. Now after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, who shall be first to go up for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? Right? Now in Judges chapter 1, verse 1, Joshua died. Right? But again, in Judges chapter 2, we see a very prominent verse. Very, very prominent verse, which actually drives the very reason why this kind of a failure, why people have compromised, is going to be able to see clearly. It says in verse 7, so the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works of the Lord which he had done for Israel. Now Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died when he was 110 years old, when all that generation had been gathered to their fathers. Another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord, nor the work which he had done for Israel. You see that? Exactly what I was talking about. You talk about the freedom in India, you talk about the freedom in the United States, there will be a generation that's going to come which will not have any value for any leader that fought during those days. The same exact thing happened here. There came about a generation, there arose a generation after them who did not know the Lord their God, not the work which he had done for Israel. Now, who is at fault here? Who is at fault? My question is, who is at fault here? And I will, make a disclaimer and say that the generation, the current generation, the leaders of the current generation are at fault here. Because they have not conveyed the message. They have not told the stories, the great thing, what God has done in their lives. Because if the verse 10 says, they did not even know what the work which had been done for Israel. They did not know what work had been done for Israel. Who's supposed to tell them? It is the generation that has actually experienced those great works in their lives. That they have to pass on from one generation to the other. That's how you can retain the values of what God teaches us during this generation. That's why, I always, when I look at a kid that is wayward, the only thing is, I got to look at the parents and tell them that, guys, you're not doing something right here. You're not doing your homework here. You have not been teaching the kids well. The reason why your kids are like this is because they have not been taught the right way. Teach, the kid the way that he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from him. He will not. Even if he departs, he's going to come back. Even if he departs. There are kids that have departed and come back because they've been taught the right thing. Right? So that is where, the judges have been introduced. That's where the wrath of the Lord was poured upon this generation. And then we see in verse 2, 11 to 15, Israel's unfaithfulness. Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, and who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. And they followed the other gods from among the gods of the people who were all around them. And they bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. They forsook the Lord and served Baal and the Ashtoreth. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel. So he delivered them into the hand of the plunderers who despoiled them. And he sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, so that they could no longer stand before their enemies. Wherever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for calamity, as the Lord had said, and as the Lord had sworn to them, and they were greatly distressed. Why is all this happening to them? Because Moses in Exodus chapter 34, was warned, that you should tell these people that they should not serve other gods, and they served them. They served them, and God will not take it. He is a jealous God. He is a God. His name is jealous. And we as Christians, we need to remember that. I mean, when I see, sometimes back home in India, I've known some couples where, the guy, just because, I don't know what the reason was, but, the guy used to be so jealous about his wife. Right? He would be so possessive and jealous that even, if they went to a wedding or something, he would not even stand his wife talking to another man or another gentleman. He would not. Right? And for that reason, the wife would be always careful, never to cross that line, because she has that in her mind, that my husband is jealous. I don't know whether that jealousy is good or bad, but we should always remember that our God will not share His love, our love for Him with anybody else. Anybody else. Any idol that is in your heart. There's any idol in your heart, that you have been serving, God will not take it. And because He will not take it, He will actually work against you. And if things are not working for you, you should realize that, I serve a jealous God, and maybe I'm not being, sincere and honest, and, He's not my only God. Maybe there are other gods that I have in my life, and I have led them without my knowledge, like David was sharing here. Right? There might be a sin that you may not realize. One sin. You try to bring up the plant, you're giving that water and whatever it is, and then you forget that it needs sunlight and you're putting it in the basement or something. You think it's going to grow up? It's going to die. Because one factor that makes it live, you're not providing that. In the same way, if there is any sin that is in our life, any sin, we'll get to that later. But look at the same chapter, verse 16 to 19. Nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges who delivered them out of the hand of those who plundered them. And you may ask, why? Why, Lord? Why do you always, get these guys back? Why do you always, bail them out? Why are you so compassionate? Right? Why don't you just show them, the consequence of going back? And then you'll see that the answer to that question also. Yet they would not listen to their judges. God raised up judges who delivered them out of the hand of those who plundered them. Yet they would not listen to the judges, but they played the harlot with other gods. Same word, the exact word. If you go back to Exodus 34, right? Look at verse 15. Lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they play the harlot with other gods. Same exact what they did is they're playing the harlot again here. I don't have to explain what playing the harlot is, right? With other gods, and bowed to them. They turned quickly from the way in which their fathers walked in obeying the commandments of the Lord. they did not do so. And when the Lord raised up the judges for them, the Lord was with the judge and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved by pity, by the groaning, because of those who oppress them and harass them. You know, at the same time, look at this jealous God, when his children cry out to them, he takes pity on them. I mean, that is the kind of balance that I think we as Christians should have in our lives. That is the kind of balance. You know, as you know, there are fathers, there are husbands that are so strict that they don't even have, you know, the kids are looking at like, is there another side to him? Is there, you know, we have never seen this guy show love at all. You know, I know people like that. And we as Christians have to be like, you know, he's our heavenly Father, and as you are placed as the father of a household, you also have to, you know, have those qualities in us. Right? When it's time to show mercy, when it's time to show pity, you got to show it. And when you ought to be jealous, you got to be jealous. And when you have to be, you know, strict, you got to be strict. But the Lord was moved by pity, by their groanings, because of their those who oppressed them and harassed them. And it came to pass when the judge was dead, that they reverted and behaved more corruptly than their fathers by following other gods to serve them and bow down to them. They did not cease from their own doings, nor from their own stubborn way. Same vicious cycle. The judge, you know, is being, you know, God has put him to deliver them. They're delivered. They, you know, the word that is used is, so Israel lived blank years peacefully. Right? So after every story of the judge, this is what it says, right? You can read it yourself. From Othniel, Ehud, and Deborah, Barak, you read anybody, it shows that. And after those peaceful days, again the cycle starts. These guys never learn. Don't laugh at them. They are like that. Don't laugh at them, right? It looks like they are human beings, and we are human beings too. As much as we want to please the Lord, we are exactly like them. As a dog that goes back to its own vomit, that's so yucky. But that's how we are as human beings. As a dog that goes back to its vomit. Right? Revert. Revert is we use that word in IT a lot. When software doesn't work, revert to the previous configuration. Install the previous version. Revert to the old software version. These guys are reverting to their old ways again. Following other gods, serving them, bowing down to them. How could you do that, man? After so much that God has done in your life, how could you ever bow before an idol? I can't get that. I cannot get that. I think it's incomprehensible for you and me, right? But that may be a physical wooden image that you're talking about, that you may not bow down to. But there may be other things, I'm going to get to that soon, that you may be bowing down to, right? So, the judges, the big ones are Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, Gideon, Jephthah, and Samson. The little ones are Shamgar, Tola, Jair, Abdon, Elon, and Ibzan. So these guys were, like we read, God used them to deliver the people from their oppression, right? And we will look into who oppressed them during the time of Othniel, who oppressed them during the time of Ehud, who oppressed them during the time of Deborah. So different kinds of oppression came from different areas of the geographical areas, right? And who actually God chose according to where the oppression came from, right? God chooses them. And this spans about 300 years of the judges, you know, taking care of the Israelites. And again, and during these 12 judges, the main 12 judges, you know, it starts with Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. And then, therefore, the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel. Then what happened? The children of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then what happened? The Lord raised up a deliverer for the children of Israel. Then what happened? The judge went to the war and the Lord delivered. right? And then what happened? So the land had rest, blank number of years, 40 years, 50 years, whatever, right? And then what happened? I don't have to tell you that. Again. And actually it says that. And it says Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. You know, it starts with Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. And then you go to Ehud, it says Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. You go to Deborah, again they did evil in the sight of the Lord. I mean, when you look at that, do you get a picture of your own life? I do. I mean, we are like that. And that's why it is so relevant to us. The book of Judges speaks volumes about how we, as human beings, are not faithful to our God. It speaks volumes about that. And then I want to consider today, right? There are, people talk about 7 deadly sins, right? There's 7 deadly sins. Lust, greed, anger, envy, sloth, pride. There may be so many others, right? And this is something that I discovered maybe a few weeks ago. What is iniquity and sin, right? The Word of God talks about iniquity and sin. What is iniquity and what is sin? So iniquity is this. These are iniquities. Meaning to say, these are the foundational things that are in you which will make you sin, right? If you have lust, what are you going to do? You're going to be a fornicator. You're going to be an adulterer. That is sin. Adultery is a sin. Fornication is a sin. Lust is iniquity. What drives fornication is lust. So what drives sin is the iniquity that is in us. And the reason why I have this verse is because we need to know as Christians that the term generational curse is a reality. It is a reality, right? But, and in the same chapter 34, God said, before, God gave them the warnings, God said, and the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, God is telling, He's proclaiming Himself, right? The Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abounding in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and the children to the 3rd and the 4th generation. For how many generations is generational curse going to follow you? For at least 3. Worst case, 4 generations. What does it mean? What do you mean by that? What I mean by that is, if I have certain things like pride in me, right? If I'm a prideful person, if I'm a greedy person, if I have anger in me, if I have lust in me, if I'm a lazy person, if I have pride, if I have envy, where does this come from? Where does this come from? They are generational. You have inherited them from your fathers. And how do you get rid of them? You can get rid of them by crying out to the Lord. Because now we have a new covenant. This is the old covenant. According to the old covenant, there is generational curse. But if you don't confess those generational curses upon you, and even if your father is alive, you can actually pray for their sins, that their curses, whatever their curses are, may not come upon you, because we are living in a new covenant and under the blood of Lord Jesus Christ. We are able to cancel those curses. You are able to do that. But will you do that is a question. Will you do that? And will you make sure that whatever you have imbibed from your parents, you do not pass on to the next generation? You know what I'm saying? What I'm saying is, if I have anger in me, I have to confess for my dad, for my grandfather, from whoever I have inherited that. At the same time, live a life in gratefulness so that I don't pass it on to my sons, to my daughters, to my next generations. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Because God, His grace abounds for thousands of years. But his curse, it goes on to 4 generations. If you don't confess it in the name of Jesus Christ, you may still have those issues in your life. You may still be struggling with lust and sloth and greed and pride and envy. You may be. And the only way you can do it is through the blood of Lord Jesus Christ. Under a new covenant. When I come under a new covenant, man, it's a totally, grace abounds. If sin abounds, grace abounds much more. The word of God says that. And what a danger it is if you are not under the new covenant. Just imagine that. If you are listening, if you have been hearing these stories, and if you're not actually believing in the Lord Jesus Christ and in the power of His resurrection, if you're not doing that, what a danger it is. Who will save you from that generation curse? Just imagine. It's in your hands and my hands. And we need, as Christians, we need to take it so seriously that we don't repeat the things that the Israelites have done during those 300 years. Again and again, time and again, falling up and getting up, falling down and getting up, falling down and getting up. They cry to the Lord. Lord is angry with them. They cry to the Lord. Lord raises up deliverer. The deliverer goes up for war. He wins the war in the name of Jehovah, and then the land has rest. And when the land has rest and you are enjoying liberty and abundance, that is not the time you are going to be selfish and greedy and envious. That is the time you are going to say, you know what, Lord, I thank you for this deliverance that you have given me. I would love to stay in this liberated state for the rest of my life. I want to be liberated. I don't want to go to bondage anymore. And you will not go to bondage anymore only if you remember throughout your life that your God is a jealous God and He will not share anything. Have you shared your love with any other God? Whether it be any of these things. Being prideful, being lustful, being greedy, being angry, being envious. Envy is nothing but, being covetous. That's exactly what we need to. And as we go into the life of Othniel and Ehud and Deborah and Barak and all these judges, there's a beautiful story in each. There's a beautiful lesson that we can learn from each of these judges, and we'll see, as the Lord leads, how much more He has to say to us, so that we can live a life that is totally, dedicated to Him, and not we're not sharing that love with anybody else. May God bless His word.
Pray for the orphan.